Hi, this is Lucky. Today I'm gonna be going through chapter 12. I'm going to be driving, and Baba is going to be my navigator today. So we're first gonna start with the first chapter project, which is the email extractor. And here we're given HTML as a starter template, and we were tasked with adding JavaScript to make an extractor, a functioning email extractor. So we were given these 6 steps here, and the first of these steps is to use JavaScript to select both text areas and the button and set them as JavaScript objects. So in our HTML here we have 2 text areas here, and then we use JavaScript here. We create 2 variables called area1 and area2. We use the query selector method to get the text area here and store them, to get both text areas and store them in these variables here. And because we want the text that's inside, we use this name equals text area variable because it's a query and we want to grab whatever is in the name. So in the second step, we want to add an event listener to the button that will invoke a function that gets the content of the first text area and filters it to only accept email addresses. So this is the event listener that we have here. As you can see, we have a query selector applied on the button, and then we have the click event listener, and what this does is that it runs the lookup function. And then in step 3, we are going to go into the function, get the content of the first input field. We're going to use match and return an array of the email addresses that were matched from within the content from the first text area. And then we're going to remove any duplicates and create a separate array that will hold only unique values. So that's what this function does here. As you can see here, we take the value of the first area, we keep it in this variable called raw text. We create a variable called email, and then we use the match method here, and we use regular expressions to basically get the exact email format that we want. As you can see here, we go through, we're going to check if it has any lowercase letters from A to Z and any uppercase letters from A to Z, any digit from 0 to 9. We're going to check if it has a full stop, an underscore, or a dash, and then it must have a @ symbol in between. And then we're going to check these things again. This is the same exact as this. And then here we have an escape character to make sure that it does have a dot. And then here it can be anything, .com, .net, whatever. And then here we have G and I. This G is to make sure that we're checking if it's global or not. So we're going to be looking for if it appears more than once. We are going to account for that. And this I is just to make sure that it's case insensitive, and it doesn't matter if it's not matching exactly in terms of the case. And then we're going to create a holder variable here, and we're going to give it an empty array. I created a for loop here where I go through each index of the email, this one that we got here, and then we check if the index exists. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to give us -1. So if that happens, what we're going to do is that we're going to push, that's going to be this unique value that's spoken of here. We're going to push it into the email, right? And then we have area 2. We're going to grab the value of area 2 here, and then we're just going to take the holder array, and then we're just going to join that using commas. So if I just show this on my browser, okay, it's taking a while. Phew. Okay, yeah, here we go now. We have the email extractor here. As you can see, these are the two text areas that we have on our HTML document there, and then I'm just gonna put just a random email here, and then if I get the email, as you can see, it puts it here. But then if I refresh here and then I do maybe something like this, right? So this does not match with the formats that we specified with our regular expression, and when I click get emails, nothing happens, as you can see. But then if I do it the right way, you can see it's copied here, it's extracted, right? So that is chapter, no, so that's chapter project, the first chapter project, the email extractor. I will now move on to the second one, which is the form validator. Okay, so this is the second of the chapter projects. It is the form validator. So this project it takes a typical form structure, and we're going to check the values that are inputted into the form and validate whether they are valid enough, whether they are valid before we can proceed. So as you can see here, I created 1, 2, 3, 4 variables, which is my forms. My forms is just the query selector to grab the form from the HTML. We have input here, which is just query selector all to get all of the inputs from our HTML, and then we have the errors variable here, which will query selector everything that is the class of error, and then we have required here, which is a 2-element array containing the string email and the string username. So I now add an event listener to my form, and on submit we're going to run the validation function, and then inside of the validation function, as you can see, we create this empty object here, and then we use the event object to run the prevent default method to just prevent defaults, and then we loop through each remember we use the query selector all for everything that is the class of error. So we loop through everything that is the class of error, and we run this function here, which takes item as a parameter, and then we add a class list. We use the class list to add the class of hide to these errors here, everything that is the class of error, and then we're going to create a variable here that's separate from this one, which is a boolean here called error, and it's going to be false. It's going to start off as false, and then we're going to loop through each of the inputs, and then we're going to create a variable called temp name, and then in temp name we're going to get the we're going to use the get attribute method to get the name, right? And then we have an if statement here, and then on our if statement we're going to check whether temp name is empty or not, whether it's null, and then if temp name is not null, so that means if there is something in temp name, that means we were able to get something using the get attribute method. We're able to get the name. We are going to change the border color and make it this color here, and then we are going to run an if statement again, and then in this if statement we're going to use this element that we passed in as a parameter here, and we're going to get its value and its length, and then we're going to see if that is 0, and also we're going to see if our required variable here, which is the array, if it includes temp name, and then if it does, we're going to add an error which will run our function add error, and then here it's going to take the element as a parameter. It's going to take this string required field, and we're going to pass in temp name, and we're going to change this error here to become true now. And then we have the second of our if statements, and then here we're going to check if temp name is email. So whatever the user what we got here from this element, we're going to check the attribute if it's an email, and then if it is, we are going to create this variable exp, and then we are going to use the regular expressions basically to check if it's the correct format, which is similar to what we did with the email extractor. And then we're going to create the results variable, and then in the results variable we're going to use the test method of exp to to check the value of the element, and then if there is no result, we are going to run the add error function again, passing it the element, the string invalid email, and temp name here, email, as you can see. And then we're going to update our variable error is to true. Basically all this does, these four if statements, all they do is just tell us if there's something in our inputs that's not the way it should be, it's not formatted correctly. And then it's just a similar if statement again, but now instead of email we're going to use password. We're going to check using regular expressions if the password is of the correct format. We're going to check the value. If there's no result, we will run our add error function again, passing it the element, and then we're going to pass in the string now only numbers and letters and the temp name, and then update our area boolean to true, right? And then if there is so if the element value length is less than 3, right, and element value length is element value, so if the length of the value of the element is greater than 3, and also at the same time the length of the value of the element is less than 9, so it's between 3 and 9, that will return true. But then if it returns false, we are going to run our add error function again, and then here we're going to pass in the element, and then we're going to pass in the string to let the user know that it needs to be between 3 and 8 characters, and then we're going to pass in the temp name, and again we're going to update our boolean to true, right? And then at the end of all of that, we're going to go into our data objects that we created here, and then we are going to create a property of temp name, and then we're going to add the element's value into that. And then if there is no error, we are just going to submit the form, right? So now you saw that we ran the add error function, so let's explain it a bit. As you can see, it takes in 3 parameters, which is element, message in string format, and the field name, right? So we create a variable called temp, and then in temp is basically the next element sibling of the element that we pass in as an argument. And then we remove the class of height. Remember, we added the class of height there, so what that does is that it's going to show these messages here. These messages stay hidden until we remove the class of height, and then it shows, right? And then here we are going to update the text content, right? So now that the class of height is showing, we are going to put the text that it's actually showing by updating the text content here, as you can see. So whatever we pass in here, so it could be either password, email, whatever we saw on the other if statements, and we're just going to turn that into uppercase. We're going to concatenate it with the space here to space them apart, and then we're going to add the string that we pass in as a argument here, which is either this needs to be between only numbers and letters or invalid email, just telling the user what's wrong with their input. And then we're going to change the border color of the input section of the form into red to basically highlight what's wrong, and we're going to focus to get the cursor to be on the input box that the user needs to correct. So if I open this on the browser just to display how it works, as you can see here, we have 3 inputs and a sign up button, and then I'm just gonna do it wrong intentionally again, just to show you all this functionality, these if statements and this add error function here. And then I'm just gonna make this wrong also. I'm just gonna add special characters like slashes, pipes, brackets, stars, and whatnot. And then the username, I'm just gonna use my name. And then as you can see, this, because it's an invalid format, the input box, firstly the border color is updated to red, and then we get to this text content string that we created here, telling us that the email is invalid, the password, only numbers and letters are allowed, and the username is okay, right? So that is the form validator. I shall now explain the last of our projects, which is the simple math quiz. Okay, so the last of our chapter projects is the simple math quiz, and then in this project we are tasked with creating a math quiz that would allow users to respond to math questions, and this application should check the responses that the users provide, and then it should also determine the accuracy of the user's answers to the question. We are given the HTML here, and then this is our JavaScript code to just make that work. So firstly, I create a variable called app, and I store an anonymous function in app, the app variable, and then I just create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables. The first being game, which is an empty object. The second is value1, which is a query selector that I used to grab anything that is the class of value1 on our HTML. And then we have value2, which is the same thing, but we're grabbing everything that is the class of value2 from our HTML. And then we have output. Output is just using the query selector method to grab anything that is the class of output. And then we have a variable called answer, which will just be the input that which is just going to grab the input on the HTML, the input tag, right? So now all in our app variable, which is storing this function, so it's all in the function. We have another function inside the function. This one is called init. This is to start everything, so it's a event listener on the button, so that's when you click on the button, it runs the checker function and then loads the question, right? So now we use random values to determine the numbers that we are going to be providing the user to do the whole quiz, the whole math quiz. So we use the random value function for generating those random numbers that we are going to give the user, and then this just returns it takes 2 parameters, which is the minimum and the max, and it returns a random number between the minimum and the maximum plus 1. And yes, this is just to make sure that it doesn't start at 0, it starts at the minimum. And then we have all still inside the anonymous function. We have the load question function now, which goes into the game objects that we created earlier, and then it just stores this random value here between 1 and 100, right? Which is 1 is going to be our minimum, and 100 is going to be our maximum. And then we do the same for our value2, right? And then we do we go into the property, the answer property of the game object, and then here we just add value1 and value2 to get the answer. That's why it's called answer. And then we update the text content of value1 so that it becomes it's value1 basically just shows the number that we generated here, and then we do the same with the value2 to update the value1 property and the value2 properties of our game object, right? So the last of our functions here is the checker function, which inside of which we created a bg a variable, which is storing this is a ternary operator here to say that if the value of the answer is same as the answer in as the answer property in our game object. So if it is the same, if this is true, they are the same, we are going to get get the string, we're going to return the string green, and then if it's false, we're going to return the string red, right? And then now we're going to our output and creating the inner HTML of our output by concatenating this HTML code here, right? And we are passing various variables that we've created and worked with before to create this whole div here, so the color will be determined by bg, right? So that's either green or red depending on whether the answer the user gives is the same as the answer in our game object. And then here we have the variable here that will display the value1 property in our game object, and then the value2 property of our game object, and we are just adding those We're not actually adding this the inner HTML. This is just to show value 1 plus value 2, the numbers, and then equals to the number for the answer property of our game object. And then we just, after we're done with that, we just update the value of the answer, which is where the user gives an input, into an empty string, just to clear the text box, the input box, and to make it empty. It doesn't show the previous number, the previous input that the user gave. And then we run the load question function, and then after all that is done, we return this function here, init, which just starts everything over again and generates a new random sum, a new random equation, right? And then here we have we add a DOM content loaded event listener to our document to run the init function of the app variable. So remember, everything is stored in the app variable. So this just means that we wait for everything in our document to load, and then after it loads, we run the functions, these various functions that are all in app, by starting by running the init function, right? So what this simple math quiz looks like on our browser, I'm just gonna open it on our browser. Excuse me. Yes, so this is what it looks like. This is value 1 and this is value 2, and these are the random numbers that were generated, and then we have 12 plus 14. So I do know this one, so I'm just gonna guess it, and as you can see, it's green because the answer was correct. And then we have 95 plus 53. I'm just gonna intentionally guess wrong, and then as you can see, it becomes red, and it actually, you see the inner HTML is updated and it shows us the correct answer, and then in brackets it shows us the answer that I guessed. And then this one, I'm just gonna get it wrong again intentionally, just to show, and as you can see, it clears everything. So that is the simple math game quiz. That was chapter 12. So in chapter 12 we did a lot of different things. We learned how to work with regular expressions to specify specific patterns that we are looking for in user input, and we also considered functions and arguments as objects in which we can access their arguments by their index. And then we continued by looking at JavaScript hoisting and strict mode. As you can see, all of our code was using strict mode. And also another thing that we looked at in this chapter was working with JavaScript object notation, also known as JSON. Yes, that is all for chapter 12. Bye bye.